Hello. Today we are going to be talking about Chapter 1. This first week of May 24th through May 30th, we are dealing with the first chapter that really talks about a little about how e-commerce came about and this growth and gives you a lot of terms. Before you start today, I'd like you to watch a video. The video is linked in the lessons here, or else you can find it in course materials under web links. It is called E-commerce Revolution. And in this video, it just shows you two businesses or companies and how they have moved from a brick and mortar shop to also including e-commerce into their business. So it kind of gives you an example of how it's moved along and how those businesses that are in a store can actually move on and do that kind of thing. Some important points that I want you to remember out of Chapter 1 or understand when you get done reading Chapter 1. I want you to understand that a lot of these chapters are really long, and so I do want you to read them, skim through them, make sure you read the charts because the charts have great information on them and really help you explain it. Some of the case studies and things like that, insights, there's sometimes I do specifically ask you to read one. There's other ones that you can read to help you understand some of that information that they are talking about in the chapter. The first thing I want you, and first bullet important thing, is for you to remember and understand that e-commerce is the fastest growing retail service and entertainment channel right now that we have in the U.S. Although e-commerce revenues were kind of flat during the recession of 2009, they have still grown since 2010 to 2013. In 2012, they outpaced traditional retail. Okay, so even as traditional retail has moved to the web, that's what a lot of times why it is opening up in e-commerce. E-commerce is also offering many jobs as this revolution is coming around and more people are using it. There is a table that's on page 7 and 8, a table 1.1 that I would like you to specifically take a look at because it really talks about the different points of how companies have moved and some of those phases that they go through as they move into that area. The second thing I want to make sure you understand through Chapter 1 is they give you a lot of basic definitions, and they want you to make sure you understand the definitions dealing with e-commerce. These definitions are things that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the book, and you're going to have to reference them. Things like the difference between e-commerce and e-business. There is a difference between them. They try to set it out and make it a clear difference as they go through this chapter. You're also going to find out things that's called business to customer, B2C, business to business, which is B2B. You're going to talk about those a little bit in those topics in the book around page 21 and 23. So it's important to make sure you read those and understand what they mean by that so that as you move through the rest of the book, we have a clear understanding and can reference back to that. You will find an insight that is called, or insight technology is called spider webs, bow ties, scale-free networks, and the deep web. It is a case that actually debunks some of the most popular myths about the structure of the web and how the web was actually designed and structured and those kind of things. And this is important just because we talk a lot about the web in the book and talking about how it affects e-commerce and how people have to deal with that when they deal with e-commerce. And so what I'm wanting to make sure you understand is how does the search engines really work? Why do they miss pages? How is that all that concept happened in there? Because a lot of that does have to deal with when we're talking about a business and going out there in e-commerce. I mean, how did they get their website to pop up on when people do searches? Another important distinction that you need to realize is the contrast between the early years of e-commerce and e-commerce today. Table 1.5 talks about those key periods and the dimensions within those periods and how it's transitioned. This will just give you a clear understanding as we move through the rest of the book how things have changed and how we've gotten to where we are today. Another important thing I want you to come out of this chapter with is how the early years of e-commerce really promised and brought about terms like disintermediation, first movers versus fast followers, network efforts, friction-free. All those are different things in terms that came out. And the e-commerce really talked about how it really brought these definitions to meaning. And again, table there is a Insight on Business that said, is a party already over, that talks about some perspectives of that and of the .coms. Again, that would just maybe be an interesting read if you're interested in it. A major theme throughout this book you're going to find out with e-commerce is that how it affects many societal forces and how those societal forces affect it. Not only are we talking about social media, that is a huge thing. Social media is. What is your attitude? How do we use Twitter? How do we use Facebook to advertise, those kind of things? But we're also talking about how does the legislation, what kind of legislation needs to be in there to help shape e-commerce and the internet? Do we need to have legislation about privacy? Do we need to have legislation about whose property is what when we talk about copyrights? We spend some time talking about that, like copyrights and patents and who's responsible and who has those things and how can we control them. It looks a little bit, there is an Insight on Society, which is Facebook in the Age of Privacy, that introduces some of those societal things to you. And you're going to see those recur throughout the whole entire book as we talk about marketing, as we talk about advertising, which can be a little bit the same as marketing, but there's some different angles you can go at. And so you'll see more and more of that. In concluding the chapter, there's this thing called the Pirate Bay, the world's most resilient copyright infringer. It talks about the music industry and how the music industry has gone through this era of issues with copywriting where music is free. Okay, now we're willing to pay for it. And what is the cloud really going to be? I have that explained a little bit more in my lesson notes, and you be sure to read that. Also, you can look into that part of it if you want to. And again, those cases just give you more insight, so it kind of puts what they're saying to practical use. Again, this is a long chapter. A lot of these chapters are long. There are 2 assignments that I want you to do under coursework. One of them actually has you reference back to a table in the book and look at a website out there. Any kind of e-commerce website you want to look at, whether it's eBay, Walmart, Target. You can go out and Target, Old Navy. I buy a lot of things from East Bay online if you want to do something like that. I even have a friend that's called Lala Red. She sells belts that she makes. And so that could be an e-commerce website that you could just look at. And they ask you to identify some of the key unique things that fall underneath those websites. So I hope you have a enjoyable time reading this chapter. It's a very introduction of it, getting us into e-commerce, getting us to the idea of it. And then as we look at these 2 these 2 assignments, they'll give you some insight into what and pull everything together. Please let me know if you have any questions. Shoot me an email, and have a good week.